In this update, we're going to be experiencing some big changes ahead, especially as we transition into October. First, let's take you back over the last 30 days. Here are your temperature anomalies, and it's been plenty warm across a good part of the country for areas across the north and even areas across the south and as well as into the northeast. Only really cooler pockets in town overall has been the west coast and some areas and pockets into the Great Lakes. And where we've seen the most rain over the last 60 days is really highlighted. A lot of this came from Hillary as far as above average rains across the west. But notice across just the west coast, the extreme coast conditions, they've actually been on the drier side. It's not just until you go inland as far as the eastern portions of Washington and Oregon, especially as you head into Idaho. Those areas have been seeing some well above average precipitation anomalies. And further south across the southern plains, it's been plenty dry, but it's been completely the opposite across the mid-Atlantic regions. And especially as we head into New England, into Maine, it's been plenty wet. And of course, Florida has been getting hit hard as of late as well. So if you are new to the channel and like detailed weather breakdowns, hit the subscribe button and you're in. You get all my daily content on this channel, and I would love to reach 200,000 subscribers by the end of the month, and you can actually help me get there by subscribing to the channel and following all my daily content. So let's take a look at Ophelia, because right now it's actually officially been named. They just upgraded this. This is a formidable 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm, and this is going to be making landfall really actually tomorrow. So we've been talking about this, highlighting this on this channel. And yes, it's going to be making landfall into North Carolina, likely about 65-mile-per-hour tropical storm. It's going to be packing some very heavy rains as this continues up the east coast, adding to those heavier rains across it all the way up into portions of New England and back into Maine again. But out in the tropics, after we deal with Ophelia, a lot of these areas, we do have a formidable system that's about an 80% probability of developing. And even if that does get named, most guidance, most ensembles actually have this actually swinging out into the open water. So it likely will not be affecting any land masses. And so it's going to be pretty quiet in the tropics front, beyond after Ophelia. But let's take a look at the latest update on the El Nino, because the El Nino is actually still out there and it's still continuing to get stronger, and it's those well above average sea surface temperature anomalies are still evident. And that's one of the reasons why it's been so active across the Atlantic, because the sea surface temperatures have been so warm, not just in the Atlantic, but in the Caribbean and to the Gulf of Mexico. You see these cooler pockets, and that's because of the upwelling, because of these recent storms. But here is your El Nino down here, and you can see the trend. It's been actually the highest now. It's 1.2. So that is now a formidable moderate El Nino currently. So here's the setup over the next week. So what's going to be more pronounced as the El Nino is now pretty strong, and we're transitioning out of the summer months heading into fall, it's going to be a lot more pronounced. It's going to be starting to show up and make an appearance. And that's exactly what we're seeing into the evidence of the jet stream, where this more active subtropical jet is definitely getting a lot more pronounced. And at the same time, we've got pretty significant troughs going to be diving in from the Aleutian Islands. And look at that low pressure, guys. That's a 968 millibar low pressure. That is a formidable low, and that's going to have a lot of colder air associated with it. And so the West Coast is really going to be on the chillier side and actually the rainier side, while the middle of the country is going to be really warm continuing again. But with that clash in temperatures, that's going to be setting the stage for actually multiple rounds of severe storms. So here's the setup. You got the below average temperatures across the East Coast with all of the remnants of Ophelia and the rain it's going to bring over the coming days. And then we've got that significant trough building in off the West Coast. Those bring those below average temperatures. And of course, you got the southwest winds in the middle of the country really elevate those temperatures across the middle of the country, and that's going to be spelling trouble with actually multiple days of severe storms. On the vorticity map, it's pretty evident. You got Ophelia off here off the East Coast, but we've got multiple pulses of energy. You got one coming off the Aleutian Islands, this other significant trough coming in. We've got another big piece of energy across the middle of the country. that's going to be the first initiation of rounds of severe weather taking shape on Saturday. We're going to have a pretty significant, I'd say, cool front, not much terribly cold air associated with it, but it's going to be enough to overturn the atmosphere. It's going to produce a solid line of storms, multi-state, severe storm outbreak essentially into Minnesota, back into Iowa, into portions of Missouri, into portions of Kansas, as well as into Oklahoma. And the tail end of it is actually going to be creeping down all the way into portions of North Texas. And I think it actually gets more pronounced in North Texas as that stalled frontal, as a kind of a slowing frontal boundary by then. Pushes those severe storms highlighted across North Texas. I don't think it's actually going to be until a later in the evening event, because before that you're going to be plenty warm and actually near record temperatures. So, and here are those well above average temperatures. So even heading into that last week of September, it's going to continue to be really on the very high, well above average temperature on, on the high side. Essentially, it's almost going to be hot. It's not going to feel like fall, that's for sure. But we're going to be starting to see the big changes as we get deeper into that, especially that second half of October. But first, we got some rain to deal with. So you have the well above average rains going to be with all the complements of Ophelia here, bringing all the heavier rain into North Carolina, into Virginia, back into the DC, the Baltimore region, into Jersey, into Pennsylvania, up here into portions of Long Island, getting it all the way up into Connecticut and Massachusetts and Rhode Island, even off the coast of Nantucket here. And then of course you've got those pulses of energy draped across the middle of the country. You've got waves of energy coming across Montana, into the Dakotas, back through Minnesota, and then of course that along that boundary where that cool front is with all the heavier rain. And notice the transition of heavier rains, especially just off the coastal areas, because once you hit inland and then creep towards the eastern portions of Washington and Oregon, it definitely starts to dry out. So that's going to be an evident change because you were well above average, right? So, but we're going to start seeing significant changes out here in the East Pacific. So what's been pretty evident so far is most of these systems coming off of Central America has continued on the west side. We did have that one storm, Hillary, that went and impacted California and much of the West Coast. But what we're going to be seeing is a transition of more eastern Pacific storms turning further north, right? And so once they turn further north, they're going to be getting caught up in this subtropical jet stream that's going to be screaming across. And once that does, that's actually going to be bringing some heavier rains back into portions of New Mexico, into West Texas, into the Texas Panhandle. Those areas are going to start getting well above average precipitation, and that's exactly what's highlighted across with the 3 to 4 week outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. They see the turn, they see the recurve on the Eastern Pacific storms, so that's why they've got the above average precipitation highlighted back over to New Mexico, back over West Texas, and really actually into South Texas. These are definitely areas that need it desperately. And even going into Oklahoma, into Kansas, those areas actually going to be seeing above average rains for those next 2 weeks, right? So as the more pronounced subtropical jet and as these recurves start to happen, we'll start to see this trend kind of continue going into October. And look at this, guys. This is the newest update from the Drought Monitor Index that really just got released yesterday. And this extends all the way through the end of the month. And as we go into fall, look where the drought improves. This middle of the country has been through a significant drought, right? So as these setups come in and as the more pronounced subtropical jet comes in, we're going to start to see major improvement in a lot of these areas across the South, into Louisiana, into Mississippi, into Alabama, and then head up into our Central Plains states and up into the upper Midwest. We're going to start seeing vast improvements on the drought going forward. And if we continue the trend, the latest update on the European weeklies implies even a more pronounced look. So this essentially starts the middle of October through that first week of November. on their very extended outlook, but sees the transition, see the well above average precipitation coming out of Mexico and pulling that moisture into Texas, into North Texas, Central Texas, Oklahoma, into these areas get hit hard, right? I mean, that's that they're seeing that recurve into that, from the Eastern Pacific storms. While much of the areas across the southeast actually kind of start to dry out a little bit. But notice a change going up into the teleconnections, because now we're going to take a look at that. Of course, going into fall, we expect a cool down, right? And so I think that's what's going to happen, especially as we head into that middle October, because looking at the North American oscillation, we can see a noticeable dip really highlighted around the middle of the month. I mean, we see a noticeable dip in the North American oscillation, and a pretty significant ridge is going to be coming back with the PNA going positive. So they're cooler now, but I think a pretty more pronounced ridge is going to be coming in off the west, especially as we head into that second half of October, and we're going to be starting to see a much more pronounced colder air masses coming from the north. So as the ridge will be building back across the west, this is towards, as we get towards that middle of October timeframe, we're definitely going to be seeing more pronounced, ridging off the west coast, and these systems come off the northwest flow. And with the teleconnections going southbound, more negative, that's going to pull that energy, and this could be likely being our first significant fall front of the season as that colder air mass extends all the way down into our southern states. So this is going to be definitely a noticeable change in the weather coming up, but I don't think it really happens for a couple of weeks now. So we still got some warmer temperatures to contend with, but I think there's going to be some significant changes on the way once we hit the middle of October. And definitely it's even going to get more pronounced as we go into that third week of October, with the ridge really dominated across the west and really highlighted across the eastern 2/3 of the country. Pretty significant trough highlighted over the upper Midwest, over the Ohio Valley, those areas well below average, and bringing those temperatures even further south. So if we really expanded on the North American view, we see Alaska warm, we see British Columbia warm, we see the West Coast warm. But where we see the colder pocket of air, it's really highlighted over across the central and eastern 2/3 of the US, and that goes into that third week in October. So really the trend is first half well above average, second half well below average, right? And if you live on the eastern 2/3 of the country, first half on the west coast pretty on the cooler side, second half on the west coast well above average side. That's pretty much what we're looking at for as we go into October. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, and definitely watch my winter forecast after this video, because it definitely looks to be a memorable one coming up. So I appreciate you guys watching. Do hit the subscribe button. I'm definitely trying to hit 200,000 followers by the end of the year, so I appreciate all my followers out there and appreciate the support, and catch me in the next update where I protect you before and after the storm.